Away from that, South Africa is heading for a general election on the 29th of May, which some polls suggesting the governing African National Congress could get less than 50% of the vote for the first time in 30 years. Mounting criticism of the party that led the fight against apartheid under the late Nelson Mandela has chipped away at its support, raising the possibility of a coalition government. Nearly 28 million South African registered voters will have the chance to elect representatives to the national and provincial parliaments. It will be the country's 7th democratic general election. The ANC, now led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, is under growing pressure with high unemployment, which hit 32% last year, persistent economic inequalities, corruption allegations, and frequent power cuts. High levels of violent crimes, on average 130 rapes and 80 murders a day in the last 3 months of 2023, have also dented confidence in the authorities. Let's bring the South Africans' election into perspective. Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, David Awarawo, joins me now on the What Now to discuss this. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
So analysts have said that this is going to be the African National Congress toughest election yet. We know that Jacob Zuma's corruption trial did not help the party. Cyril Ramaphosa also had his own trial, which has now been stalled for the Pala farms theft scandal. There have been unemployment, power cuts, and several issues. What is at stake for the ANC?
Well, many analysts have described this election as an election that will be a landmark. A landmark because it seems that for the first time since 1994, the ANC will lose its majority in parliament, and that means that there will have to be a coalition government in the post-election period. So many have called it a pivotal election on account of that, because it means that the ANC, if it fails to win 50%, 50 point anything percent in the election, it has to then form a coalition. And what that means is that its policies will have to be, we have to consider the opinions of others instead of the ANC just carrying on. So that is the implication for the ANC. But of course, these are just still opinion polls here and there. But it seems that the ANC may not be able to secure over 50% of the votes, considering the fact that even in the last election, it had 37%. Just a little over 50% required for it to be able to form a government on its own. And considering what has happened since then, all the scandals here and there, the poverty, the crime, the power cuts, it's almost certain that the ANC will lose its majority this time in the aftermath of the election on the 29th of May.
And we've seen previous elections giving smaller parties like the who are also major opponents anyway, the Democratic Alliance and the EFF, major or some seats, more seats in Parliament. If being the keyword, the ANC loses its majority, you have said that it will have to form a coalition government for the first time. Do you see a likely coalition between the ANC, the IFP, the DA, and the EFF?
Well, the ideologies and programs that the parties present or put out are very different. The Democratic Alliance stands for a totally different thing from what the ANC stands for, and the FP also stands for a very different. That one is very leftist. And so it would be some difficult, arrangement to be able to, for the ANC to be able to find any of these other parties to form coalition with. Especially since, in the last election, the DA had 22%. So the DA is the second most populous and important party in the country. Or the other smaller ones are just far behind. It will be interesting to see how the ANC is able to form a coalition with any of these, considering the huge ideological difference and policy prescriptions of the ANC and these other parties. What would have been easier to achieve is for all the other parties to form a coalition and form a government. But of course, that again will be difficult, considering the fact that the ANC will be very close to 50% if it doesn't get 50%. And so it will be interesting to see how the ANC is able to concede some of its, principles.
All right, I think we lost connection with you just a bit there for a few seconds, Prof. But, for the first time ever, over 50 political parties are on the national ballot paper. We also see, like you've mentioned, a series of new political parties have also emerged. Jacob Zuma's MK party is there. The Build One South Africa is there. There's also I think it's a Rise Mzansi party as well. What sort of opportunities could this election provide for these smaller parties?
Well, they will make some showing here and there, win a couple of seats, 10 seats here and there, 7 here and all that. But of course, it won't be enough for any of them to be able to form a government. It is possible that the ANC will be able to, forge a common front with some of these very small parties and ignore the DA and some of the other ones that are fairly bigger to form a government. It is not likely that the ANC will fall far short of 50% in the election. So it will only need a few smaller parties to come to join it in the in coalition to be able to form a government. So their presence will make it easier even for the ANC, where it will mean they will take votes from the DA and the other fairly big parties, and it will make it easier then for the ANC to be able to have its way. So, but it's good. But to my mind, there are too many. Many of them should have, come together so they have maybe 3, 4 very big ones contesting against the ANC will have been a neater arrangement than having such a large number that will have just a couple of seats here and there. But let's see how it turns out when the election votes.
And like you said earlier, ideological difference is also a big challenge there. Thank you so much for your time as always. Always a pleasure to have you on. Professor of International Studies, International Relations and Strategic Studies, David Awarawa. Thank you so much for your time.